What's up everyone, and thank you for stopping by the channel. Today's project is this Poland Pro backpack blower, and the problem is I just bought this used blower and I don't know if it runs. Let's take a good look at it, find out what's wrong with it, and hopefully we can fix it. In this video, we try and repair this blower. However, it may not be the exact repair you need to make to yours. We'll explore other options later in the video. In the last video, we took a look at this backpack blower and tried to figure out what the issues were. Now, the most obvious problem, of course, was a pull rope that wasn't retracting. The problem turned out to be a broken spring that needed to be replaced. Fortunately, it wasn't too much of a hassle except for having to wind the spring back up. Now, after the recoil was installed back onto the engine, it worked just like it was supposed to. We already know this engine works, so next we'll inspect the carburetor for any problems so we can hopefully reuse it. Just as a reminder, I bought this blower off of Craigslist for $10, and so far I've only had to buy a new spring for $2.60. It also took about 1.5 hours to do the repair. Now, when inspecting this carburetor, we're looking to see if the internal screen is clogged with debris and that the diaphragms have not stiffened over time due to ethanol gas. So here's the metering diaphragm, and it's still somewhat pliable. However, it's starting to show signs that it's beginning to harden. It could still work, however, replacing it is probably a good idea. Now, under the top plate, we find the pumping diaphragm, and unfortunately, it doesn't look good. What I'm referring to are these two check valve flaps. They need to be flat and parallel with the rest of the diaphragm, and in this case, it's not. If you look, you can see the flaps sit below the rest of the diaphragm, and the flaps themselves are twisted, so they won't seal like they're supposed to. Now, my usual advice is to buy a rebuild kit or a replacement carburetor, as it's just easier to do. But what if you wanted to try and reuse this diaphragm? I mean, how bad could it be, right? So in this situation, I'm going to clean the carburetor and replace the metering diaphragm and then reuse the pumping diaphragm to show you what happens when the check valve flaps are damaged like this. Before we spray this part of the carburetor, it's suggested that we remove the needle and rocker arm assembly. Just be very careful, as these parts are very small and easy to lose, especially the spring. If you lose the spring, you might as well buy a replacement carburetor. Now, the main reason we need to remove them is so that we don't damage the needle, and also to confirm that fuel will flow through the screen. In past videos, I've tried to recondition both diaphragms with varying results, and that's one reason why I don't do it anymore. Now, the main reason why I feel these diaphragms harden and become deformed is due to ethanol gas and extremely poor storage. Now, after fixing the broken recoil and seeing a couple other issues, I do believe this is the case for this blower. Now, when replacing the primer bulb, or more accurately the purge bulb, there's basically two different sizes. The larger size has a base size of a nickel, while the smaller one has a base size of a dime. This particular carburetor requires the smaller size. It's now time to remove the old fuel lines and replace them with Tygon line. The first line closer to the engine is apparently the fuel filter line, but as you can see, the fuel filter has fallen off the line. The next line we need to remove is the return line. Now, after getting the filter out of the tank, it's pretty obvious that it's in really bad shape. It's bad enough that it's just easier if we replace it instead of trying to clean and reuse this one. Now, new fuel filters are very affordable online, and this one was just a little over $1. The fuel line size I'll be using is 3/16 of an inch for both the filter and the return line. Now, to help get it into the tank, cut it at a sharp angle, and the first line I'll be running is the fuel filter line. Now, once the angle piece is in the tank, use some bent pliers to help work the line into and out of the tank so you can install the filter. Now, when you push the filter back into the tank, make sure the filter is located near the back of the tank. Now, the second line, of course, will be the return line. You can push as much line into the tank as you want, but I usually push about 1/2 inch to 1 inch into the tank. Now, when connecting the fuel lines, the return line will connect to the port that's bent, and the filter line will connect to the straight port. Now, when you press the primer bulb, fuel will come up the filter line into the carburetor and then fill the bulb, and then it will return back to the tank by the return line. As you can see, the fuel is flowing through the system like it's supposed to, so we can now install the carburetor to the engine. If your fuel comes from the tank through the return line first, stop pressing the primer bulb and swap the lines and make sure it comes up through the filter line. Now, if your primer bulb isn't filling up, then you'll need to take the carburetor apart and check the diaphragms for a problem. After we get the carburetor back on the engine, I'll try to test start the engine. Remember, this is a test run to show you what happens when the check valves are not parallel with the rest of the diaphragm. So what just happened? Well, the engine surprisingly started and idled just fine. However, after moving the choke to the run position, the engine would not rev up. The reason is that the carburetor was able to pump enough fuel for idling, but could not supply enough fuel for full throttle. To test this out, I moved the choke lever to half choke position to reduce the airflow for the available fuel. Now it did slightly rev up, but with the reduced airflow to the engine, it wasn't able to get anywhere near full speed. That means we need to replace the carburetor, and I chose to buy a carburetor kit online for $16, but you can go to your local small engine shop and order the parts. Let's see what all we get for $16. So we get a primer bulb, all new fuel lines with the grommet, and unfortunately to use it, I'll need to get a venting gas cap. Also in the box is a fuel filter and another primer bulb, and since we already replaced them, I'll just put them back into stock and use it for other projects. And of course, we get a brand new generic carburetor and a gasket, which is quite handy if your gasket is broken. Since we got new parts but we already changed them ahead of time, what I'll do is subtract the individual part costs from this kit. Now before I replace the carburetor, I want to look it over and make sure that it's almost identical to the original one, which it is, except it already has the adjustment screw in the middle of the barrel visible, which makes adjusting the carburetor a lot easier. Another reason why this engine might not be getting to full speed when we squeeze the trigger is the spark arrestor screen might be completely clogged. This would keep the engine from breathing properly and would have almost the same effect as a carburetor with a bad pump section. I didn't record it, but I did check the spark arrestor screen on this muffler and it wasn't clogged, so that's not an issue for this blower. Now the reason the spark arrestor screen gets clogged with carbon is from either running too heavy an oil mix for your fuel, or you don't use your equipment at full speed enough to help burn off the carbon. Now, even though this is a brand new carburetor, I still need to check that the fuel system will still prime. This will also confirm that the carburetor was probably put together properly at the factory. It will also confirm that we also have the fuel lines connected to the right ports as well. So it started just fine and ran very well. Now the carburetor is preset from the factory and it seems to work fine for this blower, so I'm not going to try adjusting it yet. I'll test it later on with some leaf piles and see if I have any issues. So how much time and money have I spent on this repair? Well, the carburetor kit was $16 and it came with parts that I already changed, so I'm going to subtract 10 cents for a primer bulb, and the cost of the fuel lines was $2, and finally the metering diaphragm was only $1. That means this part of the repair cost me $12.90, and I spent about 1.5 hours on it. That's not a bad total, but we need to add the numbers from the last video as well. In that video, I had to replace the spring for $2.60, and the repair took 1.5 hours as well. So to recap, I bought the blower for only $10 and had to put a total of $15.50 and 3 hours in it, so I think I got a decent deal. So my question is, did I invest too much time and money to get this blower running again? I know this isn't as good as a Stihl, Echo, or Husqvarna, but does it even matter, because in the end, I got a decent working blower. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions, and I hope to see you in the next video.